Can you imagine applying all of these principles to the work that you do, applying all of them overnight? So going from big to quick releases, only tackling one thing at a time, coalescing dev and ops, and then everybody else, that end-to-end responsibility. Oh, and automating everything. So testing, for example, and deployments. Obviously, that would be pretty difficult to do. You probably have to stop working for a couple of months at a minimum just to make all those changes. So instead of trying to change everything overnight, I strongly recommend tackling these principles one at a time. And that should sound familiar. I'm basically saying tackle them iteratively. For example, if you have customers that are chomping at the bit to get releases more frequently, say you are releasing quarterly right now, and your customers have really asked to get down to a 1-month window, then that might be the first thing that you tackle. And part of the reason I recommend an iterative approach is because you might already be deploying some of these principles. For example, you might already have a healthy balance of investing in technology to help yourself. So you probably don't need to worry about automation if you're already doing that. You don't need to perfect that when maybe the release windows would be more beneficial. So drive the decision you make about which principles to invest in. Drive that decision making with what impact it will have. Along the way, be wary of problems. That's where evaluating the impact of what you've changed can help. And also to help, I've got a few pitfalls to avoid. The first pitfall is thinking that DevOps is a one-size-fits-all approach. In other words, everything that you've done forever now, throw it out and switch entirely to a DevOps approach. I do not see DevOps as the right way to do things. I don't believe any approach is. Instead, treat it as a tool that you put in your tool belt. You might switch to a different tool at another point in time. For example, there can be situations where a big release can be more beneficial than a quick release approach. My second pitfall is to avoid a bunch of staffing changes. Don't need a DevOps department. Don't need people to be hired with DevOps in their job titles. Instead, focus on sharing these principles with everybody in your organization. Third pitfall is to avoid going overboard. Don't end up on that end of the spectrum where you're automating technology for technology's sake. Blindly automating is not a good thing. Another example of this, you'll be collecting more feedback most likely to ascertain the impact of the changes that you've made to your software. When you are collecting feedback, if you don't have a filter on that feedback and you allow it to drive where you go in the future, to drive future decision-making, then you can end up wandering. Part of the reason for this is that with feedback, maybe customer feedback or user feedback, people feel obliged to give it when you ask for it, but very few people know when not to give feedback. So you have to have a filter in front of that feedback to make it effective. So don't go overboard with that. My last piece of advice is not to expect the impact of these changes to be felt overnight. We're talking more like after a year, you'll have dramatic change. So don't expect immediate progress. And also don't be demoralized if something doesn't work out. Instead, evaluate what you're doing and continue to try the things that are working while abandoning the things that are not. And then with this, take a moment and think about what's the first small step you could make along that journey to have a dramatic impact in the next year.
We hope you enjoyed this course. If you